The grand hall of the Galactic Council was filled with beings from across the stars. Lights from distant suns poured through the crystal ceiling, casting rainbow patterns on the polished floor. Hundreds of diplomats moved through the crowd, their voices blending into a soft hum of conversation. Ambassador stood near the tall windows, watching the endless dance of politics unfold before her. She was 32 years old, young for someone in her position. Her silver diplomatic robes caught the light as she moved, marking her as one of humanity's official voices among the alien nations. She had worked hard to reach this place. Years of study, endless negotiations, sleepless nights spent learning the customs and languages of a dozen species. Now she stood in the most important building in the known galaxy, representing her people. But tonight, her mind was not on politics. Her eyes kept moving through the crowd, searching for something, or someone. The delegates walked past her, their skin glowing softly with inner light. They nodded politely and returned the gesture. Behind them came a group of warriors, their stone-like bodies making heavy sounds with each step. The diplomats flew overhead on their colorful wings, chirping to each other in their musical language. Then she saw him. A human man was making his way through the crowd. He wore the dark uniform of the Earth Defense Coalition, decorated with medals that caught the light. His hair was dark but turning gray at the sides. A fresh scar ran along his jaw. He walked with the calm confidence of someone who had faced death many times and won. Commander Daniel Hayes stopped breathing for a moment. She would know that face anywhere. She had carried it in her heart for 23 years. The other people in the hall saw a decorated military officer, a hero of many battles. They saw ranks and medals and a man of importance. Saw the young soldier who had saved her life when she was just 9 years old. The memory came rushing back, as clear as the day it happened. Colony 7 had been a peaceful place, remembered green fields and blue skis. She remembered her father's laugh and the smell of her mother's cooking. She remembered feeling safe. Then the raiders came. Their ships appeared without warning, screaming down from the sky like red demons. The colony had few defenses, just enough to fight off small pirates. Against a full raiding force, they had no chance. The attack lasted only a few hours. In that short time, over 40,000 people died. His father had hidden her beneath the floorboards of their small home. She remembered his face as he pushed her into the dark space below. He had smiled at her, trying to be brave. "Stay quiet, little one," he had whispered. "Stay hidden, someone will come for you." She heard the door break open. She heard her father shout. Then she heard nothing at all. For 3 days stayed in that dark hole. She had no food. The water in her small bottle ran out on the second day. Above her she could hear the sounds of destruction, screams, explosions, the crackling of fires. Sometimes she heard the heavy footsteps of soldiers walking through the ruins of her home. Each time, she pressed herself deeper into the shadows, trying not to breathe. By the third day she had given up hope. She was just a child, alone and terrified. She thought she would die in that dark place, forgotten by everyone. Then the floorboard above her moved. Light poured into her hiding place, and she screamed. But it was not a soldier looking down at her. It was a young human man, barely more than a boy. He wore the uniform of Earth's military, dirty and torn from battle. His face was covered in dust and sweat, and his eyes showed the exhaustion of days without sleep. But when he saw her, those tired eyes filled with relief. "Hey there," he said softly. "It's okay, I've got you now." He reached down and lifted her gently from the hole. Was too weak to stand, so he carried her in his arms like she weighed nothing at all. She clutched her toy rabbit, a blue stuffed animal with one ear missing, the only thing she had left from her old life. "What's your name?" he asked as he started walking through the ruined streets. And she whispered, "I'm Daniel. I'm going to take you somewhere safe, I promise." She believed him. Even then, even as a frightened child who had lost everything, she believed him. The journey to the evacuation zone was long and dangerous. Soldiers still roamed the streets, hunting for survivors. Twice, Daniel had to hide with her in the shadows as enemy patrols passed by. Then they were spotted. A warrior shouted and raised his weapon. Daniel turned, putting his body between the enemy and the child in his arms. The plasma bolt hit his shoulder. Felt him stumble, heard him grunt in pain. But he did not drop her. He did not stop moving. With one arm burned and bleeding, he ran through the streets, carrying her to safety. When they finally reached the evacuation ships, he collapsed to his knees. Other soldiers rushed forward to help, taking from his arms. She screamed and reached back for him. "It's okay," Daniel said, his voice weak but calm. "You're safe now. You're going to be okay." Those were the last words she heard before someone carried her onto a ship. She never saw him again. Until now. 23 years had passed. The frightened little girl had grown into a woman. She had graduated from the best schools on Earth. She had learned to speak 15 languages, both human and alien. She had dedicated her life to making sure no colony ever suffered like Seven again. And she had never forgotten the soldier who saved her. Watch Daniel move through the crowd, shaking hands with alien generals and human admirals. He looked uncomfortable in this political setting, a warrior among diplomats. She wondered if he would remember her. She had been just one child among thousands rescued from that terrible place. He probably did not even know if she had survived. But she had to try. Taking a deep breath, walked across the hall toward him. Her heart was beating fast, faster than during any diplomatic crisis. This was not about politics or treaties. This was personal. Daniel turned as she approached, his expression polite but curious. Up close, she could see the lines of age on his face, the weight of years and battles. The scar on his jaw was new, probably from a recent fight. But his eyes were the same, kind and strong, just as she remembered. "Commander Hayes," she said, surprised that her voice remained steady. "My name is Ambassador. I believe we have met before, though you may not remember." He frowned slightly, studying her face. "I'm sorry, Ambassador, I don't think I recall." Smiled, feeling tears building behind her eyes. "Colony 7, she said. 23 years ago, you found a little girl hiding under the floorboards of a burned house. She was holding a blue rabbit with one ear missing." She watched his face change as the memory returned. His eyes widened. His breath caught in his throat. "That was you," he whispered. "That was me," confirmed. "And I have waited a very long time to say thank you." Commander Daniel Hayes had never liked diplomatic events. He was a soldier, not a politician. Give him a battle to fight or a mission to complete, and he knew exactly what to do. Put him in a room full of people in fancy clothes talking about trade agreements, and he felt completely lost. Admiral had forced him to attend this gathering. The Galactic Council was working on a new defense agreement, and they wanted military officers from every member species to be present. Daniel had been chosen because he had worked with alien forces many times before. So he put on his dress uniform, pinned on his medals, and tried his best not to say anything stupid. He spent the evening making polite conversation. A general wanted to discuss shield technology. A warlord asked about human close combat techniques, and Commander shared stories of aerial battles. Daniel listened, nodded, and answered their questions as simply as he could. It was exhausting. Then a young woman approached him, and everything changed. She was human, wearing the silver robes of a diplomat. She had dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold some deep emotion. When she spoke, her voice was controlled, professional. But there was something else there, something personal. She said she was Ambassador. She said they had met before. Then she mentioned 7. The name hit Daniel like a punch to the chest. 7 was a wound that had never fully healed. He had been 19 years old when the rescue mission arrived at that ruined colony. Fresh out of training, barely more than a boy himself, nothing could have prepared him for what he found there. The raiders had shown no mercy. Bodies lay in the streets. Homes were burned to ash. The smell of death hung in the air like a thick fog. Survivors wandered through the ruins, their eyes empty with shock. Daniel was assigned to search and rescue. For 3 days straight, he and his unit moved through the destroyed colony looking for anyone still alive. They found many bodies. They found few survivors. But they kept searching. On the third day, Daniel entered what had once been a small family home. The roof had collapsed. Fires had burned through most of the structure. He was about to leave when he heard something. A whimper, soft and scared, coming from beneath the floor. He pulled up the broken floorboards and found her. A little girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, curled up in a space barely large enough to hold her. She was covered in dust and her eyes were wide with terror. In her arms, she held a stuffed rabbit, blue with one ear missing. When she saw his uniform, she screamed. "Hey, hey, it's okay," he said quickly, keeping his voice gentle. "I'm not going to hurt you, I'm here to help." It took a few minutes to convince her to let him pick her up. She was so small, so light. He could feel her tiny heart beating fast against his chest as he carried her out of the ruined house. The evacuation zone was 2 kilometers away. That might not sound like much, but in a colony still crawling with soldiers, it was a long and dangerous journey. He talked to her as they moved, trying to keep her calm. He told her his name was Daniel. He asked about her rabbit. She said it was called Hoppy and that her mother had made it for her birthday. He did not ask where her mother was. He already knew the answer. They were halfway to safety when they found them. A patrol of 3 enemy soldiers spotted them crossing an open street. Daniel had no time to hide. He turned his back to the enemy, shielding the girl with his body, and ran. The plasma bolt caught him in the left shoulder. The pain was incredible, like someone had pressed a hot iron into his flesh. He stumbled but did not fall. He could not fall. If he fell, they would both die. Somehow he kept running. His left arm went numb, useless. Blood soaked his uniform, but his right arm held the child tight against his chest, and his legs kept moving. The other soldiers from his unit heard the shots and came running. They drove off the patrol and helped Daniel reach the evacuation zone. By the time they arrived, he could barely stand. Someone took the girl from his arms. She cried and reached back for him. "It's okay," he managed to say. "You're safe now." Then everything went dark. He woke up 2 days later in a medical bay. His shoulder had been treated, and the doctors said he would make a full recovery. When he asked about the girl, no one could tell him much. Thousands of survivors had been evacuated. In the chaos, it was impossible to track one small child. For years afterward, Daniel wondered what happened to her. Did she find a new home? Did she have family somewhere who took her in? Was she happy? Or did the trauma of that terrible day break her completely? He never knew. He could only hope. Now, standing in the grand hall of the Galactic Council, he finally had his answer. The frightened child from 7 had grown into a strong and successful woman. She had become an ambassador, a leader, someone who made a difference in the galaxy. She had not been broken. She had survived. Daniel felt something release in his chest, a tension he had carried for over 2 decades. So many people had died on 7. So many he could not save. The guilt had weighed on him every day since. But here was proof that sometimes his efforts mattered. Sometimes he made a difference. "I wondered about you," he said quietly. "All these years, I wondered if you were okay." Ambassador smiled, though tears were running down her cheeks. "Because of you, I was okay. Because of you, I had a chance to grow up, to become something, to help others the way you helped me." Daniel shook his head. "I was just doing my job." "No," she said firmly. "You did more than your job. You could have left me there. You could have decided one child was not worth the risk. Instead, you took a plasma bolt to protect me. You carried me through enemy territory with a wounded shoulder. You never gave up. She reached out and took his hand. You saved my life, Commander Hayes, and I have spent every day since trying to be worthy of that gift. Daniel did not know what to say. He had received many medals over the years, many words of praise from generals and politicians, but none of them meant as much as this. This was why he fought. This was why he kept going, even when the battles seemed endless and hope seemed far away. Because somewhere out there, the people he protected were living their lives, raising families, making the galaxy a better place. People like, "Thank you," he finally managed, "for finding me, for telling me." Squeezed his hand. "Thank you for being the kind of person worth finding." They stood together in the crowded hall, a soldier and a diplomat, connected by a bond forged in fire and blood 23 years ago. Around them, the galaxy continued its endless politics. But for that one moment, nothing else mattered. The little girl had grown up, and the soldier finally knew his sacrifice had been worth it. The emergency meeting began at midnight. Daniel was pulled from his quarters aboard the Earth battleship Resolute and rushed to the main conference room. When he arrived, he found the space already filled with officers from a dozen different species. Their faces were grim, their voices tense. Admiral stood at the front of the room. She was a tall woman with gray hair and sharp eyes that had seen decades of war. When she spoke, everyone listened. 6 hours ago, our deep space sensors detected a massive fleet entering the outer systems, she announced. We have confirmed their identity. They are the Dominion. A wave of alarm swept through the room. Daniel felt his blood turn cold. They had been quiet for 20 years. After the massacre at Seven and other colonies, a coalition of species had united against them. The war that followed was brutal but short. They were pushed back to their home systems, their fleets destroyed, their power broken. Everyone believed they had learned their lesson. Everyone believed they would never threaten the galaxy again. Everyone was wrong. This is not a raiding party, Admiral continued. Our intelligence suggests this is a full invasion force. Over 2,000 warships heading directly for the inner colonies. Admiral raised her hand. What is their target? We believe they intend to strike Earth itself, replied. But first, they will attack the colony worlds along their path, including 9. Daniel's chest tightened. 9 was a new colony, built by survivors of the original 7 massacre and their descendants. It was a symbol of human strength, proof that they could not break humanity's spirit. The colony had been established just 15 years ago, and already it was home to over 100,000 people. An ambassador was scheduled to visit 9 in 2 days for a memorial ceremony. Daniel raised his hand. Admiral, we need to warn Ambassador immediately. If they are targeting symbolic locations, 9 will be at the top of their list. Admiral nodded. Agreed. Commander Hayes, I am assigning you to coordinate the evacuation of 9. You have 12 hours to get those people to safety before the fleet arrives. 12 hours, 100,000 people. It was an impossible task. But Daniel had faced impossible odds before. Understood, Admiral, he said. I'll leave immediately. He found in her quarters aboard the diplomatic vessel. She was already packing emergency supplies when he arrived. News traveled fast in diplomatic circles. I heard about she said without looking up. I assume you're here to put me on an evacuation shuttle. Ambassador, you need to leave. You know what they will do if they capture you. Finally turned to face him. Her expression was hard, determined. I'm not leaving, she said. Daniel felt frustration rise in his chest. Ambassador, this is not the time for politics. They will show no mercy. You saw what they did to 7. I know exactly what they did. Her voice was like steel. I lived it. I spent 3 days hiding under the floor while my colony burned around me. I heard the screams of my people. I smelled the smoke and the blood." She stepped closer to him. "Those people on 9 are survivors and children of survivors. They have already lost so much. They need to see that we will not abandon them. They need to see humanity's face standing with them." Daniel wanted to argue. Every instinct in his body screamed at him to throw her over his shoulder and carry her to safety, just like he had done 23 years ago. But she was not a child anymore. She was a grown woman who had the right to make her own choices. And looking into her eyes, he saw the same fire that had kept her alive in that burning colony, the same stubborn will that had helped her survive when all hope seemed lost. She would not run. She would face this enemy head-on. "Then I'm staying too," Daniel said finally. "If we can't evacuate everyone in time, we'll have to defend the colony until reinforcements arrive." Looked surprised. "You would stay, you could die here." "I could die anywhere," Daniel replied. "At least here I would die protecting something that matters." She studied his face for a long moment. Then slowly she nodded. "Together," she said. "Together," he agreed. "I made a promise to protect you once. That promise still stands." They left for 9 within the hour. The colony was beautiful in a way that made Daniel's heart ache. Green fields stretched toward distant mountains. Clear rivers wound through valleys. Children played in parks while their parents worked in offices and factories. It looked so much like 7 must have looked before they came. The evacuation began immediately. Shuttles launched every few minutes, carrying civilians to orbital ships that would take them to safety. Families said hurried goodbyes. Parents held their children close. Old people were lifted onto stretchers and rushed to waiting vehicles. But there were too many people and not enough time. By the 6th hour, they had evacuated only 30,000. By the 10th hour, 60,000. The fleet was getting closer with every passing minute. Daniel organized the colony's defenders as best he could. A few hundred retired military personnel answered the call. Some civilian security officers joined them. And then came the volunteers, young men and women who had never fired a weapon in battle but refused to leave their homes undefended. It was not enough. Daniel knew it was not enough. But it was all they had. Worked beside him, helping to coordinate the evacuation. She moved through the crowds, calming frightened families, reassuring worried parents. She held crying children and helped elderly colonists reach the shuttles. She was no longer the frightened girl he had carried through the ruins. She had become someone who gave others strength. As the 12th hour approached, the last evacuation shuttle departed. 80,000 people had been saved. 20,000 remained, along with the defenders who had chosen to stay. Daniel gathered his forces in the central plaza. Behind them stood a bronze statue of a child holding a torch, a memorial to those who died on 7. The faces of the defenders were grim but determined. They knew what was coming. They knew the odds. But they stood ready anyway. "They will not take this colony," Daniel told them. "Not today, not ever. We hold until reinforcements arrive, no matter what." A cheer rose from the crowd. It was not loud, but it was fierce. Beside him drew a weapon from her belt. She had never been a soldier, but today she would fight like one. "Are you ready?" Daniel asked her. She looked up at the sky, where the first ships were beginning to appear. "I've been ready for 23 years, she said. The battle for 9 was about to begin. The fleet arrived 6 hours ahead of schedule. Daniel watched the sky turn red as hundreds of enemy ships dropped through the atmosphere. The colony's orbital defenses fired desperately, destroying a few transports before being overwhelmed. Then the planetary shield flickered once, twice, and failed completely. The invasion had begun. Landing craft touched down across the colony, disgorging thousands of warriors in crimson armor. They moved like a wave of blood, spreading through the streets, destroying everything in their path. Daniel had positioned his defenders around the central plaza. It was the heart of the colony, the most defensible position they had. If they could hold the center, they might survive long enough for help to arrive. The first attack came from the east. 50 warriors charged across an open field, their weapons blazing. Daniel's defenders returned fire from behind hastily built barricades. Energy bolts screamed through the air. Soldiers on both sides fell. But the humans held. They pulled back, leaving a dozen bodies on the field. Daniel knew they were just testing the defenses. The real assault would come soon. He moved along the defensive line, checking on his people. Most of them had never seen real combat before. Their hands shook. Their faces were pale with fear, but they stayed at their posts. "Remember," Daniel told them, "we just need to hold. Help is coming. Every minute we survive is another minute for reinforcements to arrive." They nodded and gripped their weapons. The second attack came from the west and south at the same time. Over 200 warriors advanced, supported by light armor vehicles that could destroy barricades with a single shot. The fighting was brutal. Daniel led a counterattack against the western force, pushing them back street by street. He moved like a man possessed, his weapon never stopping, his voice constantly shouting orders. When one of his soldiers fell, he grabbed their weapon and kept firing. Beside him, the young volunteers fought with desperate courage. They had no training, no experience, but they had something more important. They had something to protect. Hours passed. The sun moved across the sky, bodies piled in the streets. The defenders were pushed back step by step. First they lost the outer districts, then the residential areas, then the commercial zone. Each retreat cost lives. Each meter of ground was paid for in blood. By the third hour of battle, they had been forced back to the central plaza itself. The memorial statue of the child with the torch stood behind them, watching over the desperate fight. Daniel counted his remaining forces. Less than half of his original defenders were still standing. Ammunition was running low. Medical supplies were gone. The wounded lay in rows behind the barricades, tended by volunteers who had nothing left to give them but comfort. But they kept fighting. Had refused to stay behind the lines. She moved among the wounded, providing first aid with steady hands. When a warrior broke through the western barricade, she picked up a fallen soldier's weapon and helped drive the enemy back. Daniel found her crouched behind an overturned transport vehicle, her silver diplomatic robe stained with blood and dirt. She looked exhausted, but her eyes were still fierce. "You should have evacuated," he said, dropping down beside her. "So should you." She managed a small smile despite everything. "I guess we're both too stubborn to run." An explosion shook the ground. They were bringing up heavy weapons. Daniel checked his power cell, nearly empty. He had maybe 10 shots left. Around him, the other defenders were in the same condition. They had nothing left to throw at the enemy. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I promised to protect you, but I don't think I can keep that promise this time." Reached out and took his hand. "You kept your promise 23 years ago. That's all that matters." She looked up at the memorial statue. "You know what I thought about when I was hiding under that floor as a child? I thought about how unfair it was, how my father had done nothing wrong, how my mother had done nothing wrong, how none of us deserved what was happening." She turned back to face him. "But then you came, and you showed me that even in the darkest moments, there are people who will fight for what is right, people who will risk everything to protect a stranger. That knowledge kept me going my whole life." Daniel squeezed her hand. "Then let's make sure it wasn't wasted. Let's keep fighting until we can't fight anymore." They rose together, ready to face the final assault. They were massing for a killing blow. Hundreds of warriors, supported by armor and heavy weapons. The defenders had nothing left but their courage and their determination. It was not enough. Daniel knew it was not enough. But they would die on their feet, facing the enemy. Then the sky lit up. Daniel looked up and saw the most beautiful sight of his life. Coalition warships were dropping out of hyperspace directly above the colony. Hundreds of them, their weapons already firing. The Resolute led the charge, Admiral's flagship cutting through cruisers like a blade through paper. Behind her came ships from every member species, destroyers with their glowing hulls, dreadnoughts covered in weapons, strike craft dancing through the sky like colorful birds. The United Fleet had arrived. On the ground, the faltered, their communications filled with panicked reports of ships being destroyed, formations being broken, commanders being killed. The invasion force that had seemed unstoppable an hour ago was now fighting for its own survival. Daniel felt new strength flood through his body. "They're here," he shouted to his defenders. "Help is here, one more push and we win this." The survivors rose from behind their barricades. Wounded soldiers picked up weapons. Civilians grabbed whatever they could find. Even raised her weapon, standing shoulder to shoulder with the fighters. They charged. The battle in the streets was short but fierce. Though already broken by the assault from above, could not withstand the fury of the defenders. Street by street, building by building, the humans pushed them back. By sunset, the last soldiers had either surrendered or fled. The invasion was over. 9 still stood. Daniel collapsed against the memorial statue, too exhausted to move. Beside him, sat down on the blood-stained ground. They were both covered in dirt, sweat, and blood. They had not slept in over 30 hours. But they were alive. Around them, the survivors began the slow work of recovery. Medics rushed to treat the wounded. Engineers started assessing the damage. Families searched for loved ones among the living and the dead. The cost had been high. Hundreds of defenders had given their lives. Parts of the colony were destroyed beyond repair. But they had won. "We did it," whispered. Daniel nodded slowly. He was too tired for words. She leaned her head against his shoulder, and together they watched the sun set over the battered colony. The sky turned from blue to orange to deep purple, painting the ruined buildings in colors of fire and hope. Tomorrow there would be much work to do, bodies to bury, homes to rebuild, a war to finish. But for now they rested. The little girl and the soldier who had saved her, together at last. Victorious against the darkness. 3 months had passed since the Battle of 9. The war against the Dominion was finally over. Their fleet had been destroyed in a series of devastating battles. Their leaders had been captured or killed. A coalition occupation force now controlled their home systems, making sure they would never again threaten innocent lives. Throughout the galaxy, people celebrated. Fireworks lit up the skies of 100 worlds. Families reunited after months of fear and separation. Soldiers returned home to the people they loved. But on 9, the mood was different. The colony was rebuilding. New structures rose from the rubble, stronger and more beautiful than before. Streets were cleared, gardens were replanted, and the sounds of construction filled the air from morning to night. The people worked with a quiet determination. They had lost much in the battle. Friends, family members, homes, and dreams had all been destroyed, but they refused to let them break their spirit. The memorial statue in the central plaza had survived the battle without a single scratch. Some said it was a miracle. Others said the spirit of 7's victims had protected it. Whatever the reason, the bronze child with the torch still stood, watching over the colony with hopeful eyes. Today, a special ceremony would be held in that plaza. Dignitaries from across the galaxy had gathered to honor those who fought and died in the colony's defense. Ambassadors in their glowing robes stood beside warlords in ceremonial armor. Diplomats perched on special platforms, their colorful feathers bright against the gray sky. Representatives from every member species of the coalition had come to pay their respects. but all eyes were focused on two figures standing at the front of the crowd. Ambassador wore her silver diplomatic robes, cleaned and restored to their former elegance. Her dark hair was pulled back, revealing a face that showed both weariness and strength. 3 months of recovery had healed her body, but the memories of that terrible battle would never fully fade. Beside her stood Commander Daniel Hayes. His dress uniform was decorated with a new medal, the Coalition Star for Valor, the highest honor that could be given to a member of the United Forces. The scar on his jaw had faded to a thin white line. He looked uncomfortable, as he always did at formal events. Some things never changed. Stepped forward to the podium. The crowd fell silent. 23 years ago, she began, her voice clear and strong, I was a frightened child hiding in the ruins of my home. I had lost everything I knew. My family, my community, my sense of safety in the universe. I was certain I would die alone in the darkness. She paused, her eyes finding Daniel in the crowd. Then a young human soldier found me. He was barely more than a boy himself, tired and scared and wounded from days of battle. But when he saw me, he did not hesitate. He picked me up and carried me through fire and danger. He took a plasma bolt to protect me. He whispered a promise that nothing would hurt me. Her voice wavered slightly, but she continued. He kept that promise. Because of him, I survived. Because of him, I grew up to become a diplomat, a leader, someone who could make a difference in this galaxy. Every achievement in my life, every person I have helped, every peace I have negotiated exists because one soldier refused to leave a child behind. She turned to face Daniel directly. 3 months ago, that same soldier stood beside me as our colony faced destruction. He could have evacuated. He could have saved himself and left the fighting to others. Instead, he stayed. He fought. He led our defenders through the darkest hours, never giving up, never losing hope. The crowd murmured in appreciation. Today, we honor the hundreds who gave their lives defending 9. We honor the thousands who fought against impossible odds. We honor the coalition forces who arrived just in time to save us all. Stepped away from the podium and walked toward Daniel. But I want to personally honor one man. Commander Daniel Hayes, you saved my life when I was a child. You saved my life again 3 months ago. You have spent your entire career protecting people who could not protect themselves. You are everything that is good about humanity. Daniel looked embarrassed. Ambassador, I was just doing my job. No, said firmly, loudly enough for everyone to hear. You were doing what humans do best. You were being kind when cruelty would have been easier. You were being brave when fear would have been understandable. You were being human in the very best sense of that word. She reached out and took his hand. Thank you, Commander, for everything you have given, for everything you continue to give, for being the kind of person this galaxy needs more of. The crowd erupted in applause. Alien and human voices joined together in appreciation. The sound echoed across the plaza, past the memorial statue, out into the recovering streets of 9. Daniel did not know what to say. He had received many medals in his career, heard many speeches of praise, but none of them had meant as much as this moment. This was why he fought, not for glory or recognition, but for people for the children who needed protection, for the colonies that needed defenders, for the innocent who could not fight for themselves. Looking at the woman before him, the frightened child who had become a leader, he knew that every sacrifice had been worth it. I would do it all again, he said quietly, every time without hesitation. Smiled through her tears. I know you would, that's what makes you who you are. The ceremony continued, but for Daniel and the world had narrowed to just the two of them. 23 years of separate lives had led them back together. Tragedy had connected them, war had reunited them, and now peace would let them heal together. Later that evening, after the dignitaries had departed and the crowds had gone home, Daniel and stood together before the memorial statue. The twin moons of 9 cast silver light across the plaza, making the bronze child seem almost alive. "What happens now?" Daniel asked. "Now we rebuild," said. "We help the survivors. We make sure this colony becomes everything it was meant to be. We work to create a galaxy where no child ever has to hide under the floorboards while their world burns." She looked up at him, the man who had shaped her entire life with a single act of courage. "And we do it together." Daniel nodded slowly. He was tired of war, tired of fighting, tired of watching good people die. But he was not tired of protecting those who needed him. He never would be. "Together," he agreed. They stood in silence for a long moment, watching the moons rise over the healing colony. In the distance, they could hear the sounds of construction, of laughter, of life continuing despite everything. They had tried to break humanity. They had failed. Because humans did not give up. They did not abandon each other. They did not stop fighting for what was right, no matter the cost. That was their greatest strength. That was their gift to the stars. And as long as there were soldiers like Daniel and leaders like, that strength would never fade. The little girl had grown up. The soldier had kept his promise. And together, they would build a future worth fighting for.